10 friends went camping in Colorado's wilderness in September 2017. 3 months later, searchers found their campsite with tents scattered across a cliff edge and bodies inside. But what investigators discovered next would haunt them forever. Most people believe that when you go camping with your closest friends, the biggest worry is running out of marshmallows or dealing with a few mosquitoes. That's exactly what Daniela Chen thought when she planned this reunion trip for her college friends. She had spent weeks organizing every detail, from the hiking permits to the meal plans, excited to reconnect with people she hadn't seen since graduation 5 years earlier. What she didn't know was that someone among them had been planning something far more sinister than roasting marshmallows around a campfire. The group consisted of 10 people in their 20s and 30s who had all lived in the same dormitory at Colorado State University. There was Daniela, the organized planner who worked as a nurse in Denver. Carmen Rodriguez, a bubbly teacher who always saw the good in everyone. Sophia Williams, the quiet artist who preferred sketching to socializing. Riley Murphy, the adventurous photographer who documented everything. Natasha Brooks, the former sorority president turned marketing executive. Brooke Patterson, the fitness enthusiast who could hike for days. Amber Thompson, the psychology student turned counselor who analyzed everyone's behavior. Then there were the 3 men: Trevor Stone, a laid-back software developer, Austin Mills, the former football player turned construction worker, and Kyle Henderson, the class clown who never took anything seriously. What made this group special was their bond. They had lived through the typical college drama together, supported each other through breakups and family problems, and maintained their friendship even as their lives took different paths. That's why when Daniela suggested a camping reunion in the remote Sangre de Cristo Mountains, everyone immediately said yes. They wanted to recreate the magic of their college days, when the world felt full of possibilities and their biggest problems were midterm exams. But there was someone else who remembered those college days very differently. Someone who had been watching them from the shadows, nursing a grudge that had festered for 5 long years. Someone who saw this reunion as the perfect opportunity for revenge. The campsite they chose was beautiful but isolated, located 3 hours from the nearest town along a winding mountain road that barely deserved to be called a road. It was the kind of place where cell phone signals disappeared and the only sounds were whined through pine trees and the distant call of eagles. Perfect for reconnecting with nature and old friends. Also perfect for making people disappear without anyone noticing for months. They set up camp on a rocky plateau overlooking a deep canyon, with 3 large tents arranged in a triangle around a central fire pit. The view was breathtaking, with snow-capped peaks stretching to the horizon and a crystal-clear stream running through the valley below. It was exactly the kind of Instagram-worthy spot that would make their friends back home jealous. None of them realized they were being watched through high-powered binoculars from a ridge half a mile away. For the first 2 days, everything went according to plan. They hiked during the day, sharing stories and taking photos. At night, they sat around the campfire, reminiscing about professors they hated and parties they barely remembered. Riley took hundreds of photos, documenting every moment for the scrapbook she planned to make. Austin and Kyle competed to see who could tell the most embarrassing college stories. The women caught up on careers, relationships, and family drama. It felt like old times, like they were 21 again and the world was full of endless possibilities. But on the 3rd night, something changed. Carmen noticed it first, the feeling of being watched. She mentioned it to Daniela while they were washing dishes in the stream, but Daniela laughed it off as typical Carmen paranoia. Carmen had always been the nervous one, jumping at shadows and worrying about things that never happened. Except this time her instincts were right. That night, while everyone slept peacefully in their tents, someone crept through their campsite like a predator stalking prey. Someone who knew exactly where each person was sleeping because they had been studying the group's routines for days. Someone who had brought tools and supplies that had nothing to do with camping and everything to do with revenge. The attack came at 3:17 a.m. according to Riley's camera, which automatically time-stamped every photo. The first sign of trouble was Austin's scream, cut short so quickly that most of the group wasn't sure they had actually heard anything. Then came the sound of tent zippers being opened from the outside, followed by muffled voices and sounds of struggle. By the time anyone fully woke up and understood what was happening, it was already too late to run. What happened next would take investigators months to piece together, and even then, they would never fully understand the depth of hatred that drove someone to plan such elaborate revenge. The crime scene they eventually discovered would be unlike anything the Colorado Bureau of Investigation had ever encountered, a twisted puzzle that revealed layer after layer of deception, betrayal, and carefully orchestrated psychological warfare. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand what really happened that night in the mountains, we need to go back to those college days, back to an incident that most of the group had forgotten but someone else had been reliving every single day for 5 years. An incident involving a person they all trusted, someone who had seemed like a friend but had been secretly documenting their every move, storing up grievances like ammunition for a war they didn't even know was coming. And that someone was Jason Pierce, their former resident assistant who had lived on their floor during sophomore year. Jason was the guy everyone liked at first, helpful, friendly, always available when someone needed to talk through a problem or borrow something. He organized floor activities, mediated roommate disputes, and seemed genuinely invested in everyone's well-being. What they didn't know was that Jason's helpfulness came with a price, and his interest in their lives went far beyond what was appropriate for an RA. The incident that changed everything happened during spring semester of their sophomore year, but most of the group had pushed it so far from their memory that they rarely thought about it anymore. It started when several of the women began noticing that their personal items were going missing and reappearing in strange places. Underwear would vanish from the laundry room and show up folded neatly in study lounges. Photos would disappear from their rooms and appear taped inside bathroom stalls. At first, they blamed it on typical dorm pranks, the kind of stupid behavior college students were known for. But Carmen, always the paranoid one, started keeping a list of incidents. She noticed patterns that others missed, like how the stolen items always belonged to specific women on their floor, and how Jason always seemed to be nearby when things went missing. When she tried to share her suspicions with the group, they dismissed her concerns as overthinking. Jason was their friend, their trusted RA who helped them through relationship problems and academic stress. The idea that he might be violating their privacy in such a disturbing way seemed impossible. Everything came to a head one night in April when Sophia discovered a hidden camera in the women's bathroom, disguised as a smoke detector. When campus security investigated, they found dozens of videos on Jason's computer, recorded over months of secretly filming the women on their floor during their most private moments. They also found detailed journals where Jason had written elaborate fantasies about each woman, describing what he wanted to do to them and rating their appearances and behaviors like they were objects in a catalog. The revelation shattered the group's sense of safety and trust. These weren't just random strangers being violated, these were young women who had considered Jason a friend, who had shared their deepest secrets with him, who had turned to him for comfort during difficult times. The betrayal felt like a knife to the heart, made worse by the knowledge that he had been watching them, judging them, and planning who knows what while pretending to care about their well-being. But here's where the story takes a turn that no one expected. When the case went to the university's disciplinary board, Jason's lawyer argued that his client was struggling with mental health issues and deserved treatment rather than punishment. Jason himself put on a performance worthy of an Oscar, breaking down in tears during the hearing and claiming that he never meant to hurt anyone, that he was just lonely and made terrible decisions because of his depression and anxiety. And incredibly, it worked. The disciplinary board, influenced by Jason's clean record and emotional testimony, decided to give him a second chance. Instead of expulsion and criminal charges, Jason received mandatory counseling and was quietly transferred to a different dormitory to finish his degree. The message was clear. His future mattered more than the trauma he had inflicted on 7 young women who would never feel safe in their own living space again. The group was outraged by this decision, but their anger was directed not just at Jason, but at a system that protected perpetrators while telling victims to move on and get over it. They organized protests, wrote letters to the administration, and demanded real consequences for Jason's actions. They made sure everyone on campus knew what he had done, despite the university's attempts to keep the matter quiet. For weeks, their campaign dominated campus conversations and local news coverage. That's when their friendship truly solidified. Fighting together against injustice created bonds that went deeper than shared classes or dorm room proximity. They became a family, united by their shared trauma and determination to support each other through the aftermath. They celebrated together when Jason finally left campus, unable to handle the social isolation and constant reminders of his crimes. They thought they had won, that their tormentor was gone forever and they could move on with their lives. What they didn't know was that Jason never forgot the humiliation they caused him. In his twisted mind, he wasn't the villain of this story, he was the victim of a vindictive group that had destroyed his reputation and ruined his future. While they were moving on with their lives, building careers and relationships and finding happiness, Jason was plotting his revenge. He spent 5 years planning, researching, and preparing for the day when he could make them pay for what they had done to him. He knew their social media accounts, their work schedules, their relationship statuses, and their family members. He had been following their lives obsessively, watching from the shadows as they achieved the success and happiness that he felt they had stolen from him. When Daniela posted about the reunion camping trip on her Instagram account, Jason saw his opportunity. He knew exactly where they would be, when they would be there, and how to find them in the wilderness. But this is just the beginning of how deep Jason's obsession ran, because what investigators found when they finally located the campsite 3 months later would reveal a level of planning and psychological manipulation that defied belief. The evidence suggested that Jason hadn't just stumbled upon their camping trip by accident, he had been orchestrating events to bring them to that exact location for months. And that's when this story goes from disturbing to absolutely terrifying. The truth about Jason's planning began to emerge when Detective Amanda Cross arrived at the crime scene in December 2017, 3 months after the group had been reported missing by worried family members. What she found defied everything she thought she knew about random wilderness crimes. This wasn't some spontaneous act of violence, it was a carefully orchestrated nightmare that had been years in the making. The campsite looked like a tornado had ripped through it, but upon closer inspection, the chaos was too precise to be natural. The 3 tents were positioned in locations that seemed random until you realized they formed perfect sight lines for someone watching from multiple vantage points. 2 tents had been dragged to the very edge of the cliff, their contents spilled out like someone had been searching for something specific. The 3rd tent, Daniela's, was found completely intact but turned inside out, as if someone had methodically examined every inch of fabric. Inside that tent, Detective Cross found the first body, Daniela Chin, the trip organizer who had brought everyone together. But here's what made Cross's blood run cold. Daniela hadn't been killed in a struggle or panic. She had been posed, arranged carefully on her sleeping bag with her hands folded across her chest like she was sleeping peacefully. Around her body, Jason had left a circle of personal items stolen from her college dorm room 5 years earlier, items that should have been long gone but that he had apparently kept as trophies all this time. The message was clear and sick. Jason wanted everyone to know this wasn't random violence. This was personal, calculated revenge against the woman who had organized the campaign that destroyed his college reputation. But Daniela's death was just the opening act in Jason's twisted performance. The 2nd tent contained Riley Murphy's photography equipment, but every single memory card had been removed except one. That card contained hundreds of photos from their college days, but someone had gone through and digitally altered every image to remove Jason's face. Where his head should have been, there were now grotesque drawings of monsters and demons, like a child's crayon scribbles over a family photo. The psychological message was chilling. In Jason's mind, they had erased him from their story, so he was returning the favor in the most literal way possible. But it was what Detective Cross found in the 3rd tent that made her realize they were dealing with someone whose obsession went far beyond normal human comprehension. Scattered across the tent floor were hundreds of printed emails, text messages, and social media posts that the group had shared over the past 5 years. Jason had been monitoring their digital lives constantly, screenshotting every vacation photo, every job promotion announcement, every relationship milestone. He had created a detailed timeline of their happiness, marked with angry red ink where he had calculated how their success was somehow stolen from his own life. The most disturbing discovery was a handwritten journal that Jason had left behind intentionally, knowing investigators would find it. The entries revealed 5 years of escalating rage and detailed planning for this exact scenario. He had researched the campsite location for months, learning every trail, every water source, every possible escape route. He had practiced hiking in and out of the area multiple times, timing his movements and testing different approaches. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a military-style operation planned by someone whose hatred had consumed every aspect of his life. One journal entry, dated just 2 weeks before the camping trip, read, "They think they can just forget about me and move on with their perfect little lives. They destroyed everything I worked for and now they're going to pay the price. Each of them will understand what it feels like to have everything taken away. Daniela first because she started this war. Then the others, one by one, until they beg for the mercy they never showed me." Detective Cross had seen plenty of crime scenes in her 15-year career, but nothing had prepared her for the calculated malice displayed in that journal. Jason hadn't just wanted to hurt these people, he had wanted to psychologically torture them, to make them suffer the same feelings of powerlessness and betrayal that he claimed they had inflicted on him in college. But here's what really made Detective Cross's investigation turn into a nightmare that would haunt her for years. The journal entries stopped abruptly 3 days before the attack, replaced by carefully drawn maps and diagrams that suggested Jason's plan was far more complex than a simple murder spree. The maps showed multiple locations throughout the mountain range, connected by trails and marked with symbols that looked like some kind of twisted treasure hunt. At the bottom of the last page, Jason had written one final message that sent chills down Cross's spine. "The game isn't over when the first players are eliminated. The real fun begins when the survivors realize they're still playing." That's when Detective Cross understood the horrifying truth. Not all 10 campers were dead at the scene. According to the evidence, at least 6 people were still missing, and Jason's journal suggested he had taken them somewhere else to continue his sick game of revenge. The campsite wasn't the end of Jason's plan, it was just the beginning. The realization hit Cross like a physical blow. Somewhere in the vast Colorado wilderness, Jason Pierce was still out there with his remaining victims, following a predetermined script that only he understood. And based on his journal entries, he was just getting started with the psychological torture he had spent 5 years planning. But what Detective Cross discovered next would prove that Jason's obsession went even deeper than anyone imagined, and that his revenge plot included elements so twisted and personal that even experienced investigators would struggle to comprehend the depths of his hatred. The breakthrough in Detective Cross's investigation came when her team found Jason's base camp hidden in a cave system 2 miles from the main campsite. What they discovered there revealed a level of preparation that bordered on professional-level surveillance and psychological warfare. Jason had been living in these mountains for weeks before the group arrived, setting up multiple camps and supply caches like he was planning a military operation rather than a revenge plot. The cave contained detailed surveillance photos of each group member taken over the past 5 years. Not just casual social media screenshots, but actual stalking photos taken outside their workplaces, at grocery stores, during family gatherings, and even through their apartment windows. Jason had traveled to different states to photograph these people without their knowledge, building a comprehensive database of their daily routines, relationships, and vulnerabilities. But the photos were just the surface level of Jason's obsession. Detective Cross found thick folders for each victim, containing printed copies of their text messages, email accounts, and private conversations that Jason had somehow accessed through hacking or social engineering. He knew Carmen's mother was battling cancer, that Sophia was struggling with depression, that Riley had recently ended a long-term relationship. He had weaponized their personal pain, planning to use their deepest fears and insecurities against them during his twisted game of revenge. The most stomach-turning discovery was a detailed schedule that Jason had created, mapping out exactly how he planned to break each person psychologically before killing them. He had assigned different torture methods based on what he perceived as their individual weaknesses. For Carmen, who had always been anxious about her family's safety, he planned to make her believe that he had harmed her parents. For Sophia, who struggled with self-worth, he had prepared recordings of fake conversations where her friends mocked her appearance and personality. Detective Cross found herself feeling physically sick as she read through Jason's meticulous planning documents. This wasn't just murder, it was a systematic campaign of psychological destruction designed to make each victim suffer as much as possible before death. The level of cruelty required to plan such detailed torture spoke to a kind of evil that most people couldn't even imagine, let alone execute. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Cross's team found fresh tire tracks leading away from Jason's cave camp. The tracks were only a few days old, suggesting that Jason might still be in the area with his remaining victims. Following the trail led them to an abandoned mining complex 15 miles deeper into the wilderness, a location that had been closed to the public for decades due to safety concerns about unstable tunnels and toxic runoff. At the mining site, Detective Cross made a discovery that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. In the main office building, Jason had set up what could only be described as a torture chamber specifically designed for psychological rather than physical pain. He had printed enormous photographs of each victim's family members and friends, then defaced them with crude drawings and threatening messages. The walls were covered with timeline charts showing every happy moment from the victims' lives since college, each marked with Jason's calculations of how their success had somehow contributed to his failures. But the most disturbing element was a series of audio recordings that Jason had prepared, each one designed to break a specific victim's spirit. Using voice manipulation software, he had created fake recordings of their loved ones saying horrible things about them, confessing to affairs, or claiming that they had never really cared. These weren't just random cruelties, they were precision-guided psychological weapons designed to destroy each person's sense of self-worth and connection to the world. Detective Cross realized that Jason's plan wasn't just about killing these people, it was about making them want to die, about convincing them that they deserved the suffering he was inflicting and that no one would miss them when they were gone. He wanted them to experience the same feelings of isolation and hopelessness that he claimed they had caused him during college. The search of the mining complex revealed that Jason had been holding his victims in different locations, moving them around to prevent them from communicating or supporting each other. He had created individual psychological profiles for each person, documenting their breaking points and designing custom torture scenarios to exploit their specific fears and insecurities. Then Detective Cross found something that changed everything. A handwritten note from one of the victims, scratched into the wall of an underground storage room. The message was brief but clear. Jason has Carmen and Brooke at the old water treatment plant. Austin and Kyle are in the mine shafts. He's saving the others for last. He wants them to watch everyone else break first. Please find us before he finishes his game. The note was signed with Riley's initials, confirming that at least some of the victims were still alive and that Riley had somehow managed to escape or hide long enough to leave this message. But the note also revealed the true scope of Jason's sick plan. He wasn't just killing people randomly, he was orchestrating their deaths in a specific order designed to maximize psychological trauma for the survivors. And that's when Detective Cross understood the most terrifying aspect of Jason's revenge plot. He had planned this entire nightmare to unfold over weeks or even months, keeping his victims alive just long enough to watch their friends suffer and die, knowing that their turn was coming next. The race against time had begun, but Detective Cross was about to discover that finding Jason's remaining victims would require confronting a level of evil that would test everything she believed about human nature and justice. Detective Cross organized the largest search and rescue operation in Colorado history, but what her team found at the water treatment plant made even seasoned officers physically sick. Jason had turned the facility into a nightmare factory, using the industrial equipment to amplify sounds of suffering throughout the complex. Carmen and Brooke were found chained in separate tanks, forced to listen to recordings of each other's screams played on loop for days. The psychological torture had been so intense that both women initially refused to believe they were actually being rescued, convinced it was another one of Jason's sick games. But the worst discovery came in the mine shafts, where Austin and Kyle had been trapped in a flooding tunnel system. Jason had rigged the water flow so that the tunnels would slowly fill over the course of weeks, giving his victims just enough air to survive while watching the water level rise inch by inch. When rescue teams reached them, Austin was barely conscious and Kyle was holding his friend's head above water, having sacrificed his own safety to keep Austin alive for 3 agonizing weeks. The search teams found evidence that Jason had been visiting his victims daily, not to provide relief or food, but to update them on which of their friends had died and how much longer they had to live. He had created a twisted countdown system, marking days on the walls and forcing his victims to participate in their own psychological destruction by making them guess who would die next. Detective Cross finally tracked Jason to his final location, an old ranger station where he was holding Sophia, Natasha, and Amber in his grand finale of revenge. When tactical teams surrounded the building, Jason's response revealed the true depth of his mental breakdown. Instead of surrendering or fighting, he started broadcasting live on social media, forcing the remaining victims to apologize to him on camera for ruining his life, while he held knives to their throats. The live stream showed the world exactly what kind of monster Jason had become. He ranted for hours about how the group had destroyed his future, how they had cost him job opportunities and relationships, how their college campaign against him had marked him as a predator for life. But his self-pitying monologue was interrupted repeatedly by his victims, who found the courage to speak the truth even while facing death. Sophia, the quiet artist who had discovered the hidden camera years earlier, looked directly into Jason's camera and said something that shattered his narrative completely. "We didn't ruin your life, Jason. You ruined your own life by being a predator who violated women. We just refused to stay silent about it. And even now, after everything you've done, you're still blaming everyone else instead of taking responsibility for being a monster." That's when Jason's facade finally cracked completely. His calm, calculated demeanor dissolved into screaming rage as he realized that even after months of torture, even after systematically destroying their sense of safety and hope, his victims still refused to validate his twisted worldview. They still saw him as the pathetic predator he had always been, not the wronged victim he desperately wanted to believe himself to be. The standoff ended when Jason made a fatal mistake born of pure narcissism. He became so focused on his livestream performance, so desperate to convince the world that he was justified in his actions, that he turned his back on his victims to address the camera directly. Amber, the psychology counselor who understood manipulative behavior better than anyone, had been quietly working at her restraints throughout his rant. When Jason turned away, she broke free and tackled him, giving tactical teams the opening they needed to storm the building. But even in defeat, Jason's evil had one final surprise. As officers handcuffed him, he smiled and told Detective Cross that she hadn't found everyone. "Trevor's still playing my game," he whispered. "He's been playing it for weeks and he doesn't even know the rules yet." The search for Trevor became a race against time through Jason's most elaborate psychological trap. Following clues from Jason's journals, teams found Trevor in an abandoned research station, alive but completely broken mentally. Jason had convinced Trevor that his friends' deaths were his fault, that if he had been a better friend in college, none of this would have happened. For weeks, Trevor had been living alone with recorded messages from Jason, gradually accepting blame for everything that had occurred. When rescuers found Trevor, he was sitting in a room surrounded by photos of his dead friends, writing apology letters to their families and preparing to take his own life as the final act in Jason's revenge script. It took hours of careful negotiation to convince Trevor that he was a victim, not a perpetrator, and that Jason's manipulation was just another form of the psychological warfare he had used on everyone. The final tally was devastating. 3 friends dead, 7 survivors carrying physical and psychological scars that would last forever, and hundreds of family members traumatized by a madman's 5-year campaign of revenge. Jason Pierce was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but even that felt inadequate given the scope of his crimes. During his trial, Jason showed no remorse and continued to blame his victims for forcing him to become a monster. He claimed that if they had just accepted his romantic interest in college instead of overreacting to his surveillance and violations, none of this would have happened. His complete inability to accept responsibility, even after destroying so many lives, made him one of the most despised criminals in Colorado history. The survivors formed a support network that continues to this day, helping each other heal while advocating for better responses to sexual predators on college campuses. They turned their trauma into purpose, ensuring that Jason's name became synonymous with the dangers of enabling predatory behavior and the importance of believing victims when they speak out. Their story serves as a reminder that evil often hides behind a helpful smile, and that the people who seem most trustworthy can sometimes be the most dangerous. But it also shows the incredible strength of human bonds and the power of survivors to reclaim their stories from those who tried to destroy them. If this story taught you something about recognizing dangerous behavior or the importance of supporting survivors, please like this video and subscribe for more true crime stories that matter. Because sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that help us stay safe and support each other through the darkness.